The last several episodes we have looked at the healing of Jesus and the regeneration, as well as the casting out of demons. But it's time to get back to the bread and butter. We're going to look at some teaching today. Not that healing and restoration is not part of the bread and butter, it's just another type. Maybe we're looking at strawberry jam today. Let us go forth. The Gospel according to Mark 7:1. Now there gathered together to Jesus the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem. So the scribes and the Pharisees are the so-called religious experts. This is what they do professionally. They think they are righteous, but in many cases and in most instances, they are merely self-righteous. So let's take a closer look. The Gospel according to Mark 7:2. For they had seen that some of his disciples ate with common hands, that is, unwashed, with hands defiled and unhallowed, because they had not given them a ceremonial washing. 7:3. For the Pharisees and all of the Jews did not eat unless merely for ceremonial reasons they wash their hands diligently up to the elbow with clenched fist, adhering carefully and faithfully to the tradition of practices and customs handed down to them by their forefathers to be observed. So the scribes and the Pharisees and their ilk, they have created their own set of rules. There was the rules that God created. We have the Mosaic Law, and they decided to add their own rules and customs on top of that. And this ceremonial washing, as we see described here, is part of that. They are going above and beyond what is required, and then setting that as the new standard that everybody has to follow. Then they're using this as a method to critique those who do not follow what they are doing. The Gospel according to Mark 7:4. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they purify themselves. And there are many other traditions, oral man-made laws handed down to them, which they observe faithfully and diligently, such as the washing of cups and wooden pitchers and wide-mouthed jugs and utensils of copper and beds. So here we have some more examples of some of the things that the Pharisees did. It was more than just washing their hands. They washed their hands when they came back from the marketplace, and they were also very religious about cleaning their dishes as well. If we look at other sources of this time of what the Pharisees were doing, they had a lot of laws and a lot of rules over a whole lot of things. With our modern sensibilities and germ theory, it doesn't sound that bad as far as washing hands after going to the marketplace or washing dishes. But we need to keep in mind that there's a certain religiosity to this that is not what we do today. And the idea of washing a hand with a clenched fist, well, that doesn't seem very effective. You'd kind of need to open your hands, put some soap on there, lather her up, and then rinse her off, right? There's a certain technique we have for washing things, whereas what they have with what they're doing is not really the same thing. It's more of a ceremonial washing than a physical cleaning and preparation that way. I threw this in the old AI, so take this with a grain of salt, but here are some rules that the Pharisees had. They were not allowed to swat a fly because it was seen as hunting. Women were not allowed to look at their reflection in case they saw a great hair and plucked it out, which would count as work. Avoiding walking through a field in the Sabbath, as a sandal might clip a grain of wheat, which would be considered harvesting. Restricting the number of steps one could take or letters one could write on the Sabbath. The Mosaic Law definitely has a lot of rules, but this web of rules they placed on top of it didn't really benefit the people. It was just an attempt to be more righteous than the next. The Gospel according to Mark. 7:5. And the Pharisees and scribes kept asking Jesus, "Why do your disciples not order their way of living according to the tradition handed down by the forefathers to be observed, but eat with hands unwashed and ceremonially not purified?" So the religious leaders here, the Pharisees, the religious experts, those who studied in Jerusalem, and they knew best. They're criticizing Jesus. They're attacking Jesus for the conduct of his disciples, that they are not following these man-made traditions that were laid upon the Mosaic law. And we're about to see Jesus correct them in their assertions, for they are deeply flawed in their hypocrisy. The Gospel according to Mark. 7:6. But he said to them, "Excellency, and truly, so that there will be no room for blame. Did Isaiah prophesy of you, the pretenders and hypocrites, as it stands written, these people constantly honor me with their lips, but their hearts hold off and are far distant from me." 7:7. In vain, fruitless, and without profile do they worship me, ordering and teaching to be obeyed, as doctrines and commandments and precepts of men. So Jesus here sets a really good precedent. He sets a standard when it comes to these spiritual matters. He does not rebuke them offhand, but use the more sure word of prophecy and scripture to counteract them. He points to references in which God declared these things and points out that they are doing what Isaiah prophesied. They are the pretenders. They are the hypocrites. Now, some of this could be due to the group that he is talking to. As they profess themselves to be experts in this, it makes sense for him to rebuke them in an expert manner. Whereas when we see him talk to the more casual audience, he tailors his message for them, not being contradictory or anything, but being more decisive with those who supposedly know the answers. Truly, this is a wise response to their criticism. But he goes even further, the Gospel according to Mark. 7:8. You disregard and give up and ask to depart from you the commandment of God and cling to the tradition of men, keeping it carefully and faithfully. 7:9. And he said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting, thus thwarting and nullifying and doing away with the commandment of God in order to keep your tradition, your own human regulations. So Jesus here is pointing out that throughout doing all of this, they have missed the point, and they are actually driving a wedge between God and man through their regulations. As far as things go to say to religious leaders, this is probably incredibly offensive. They came there to chastise, but instead Jesus is attacking them quite severely. This is very severe what he has said to them here. Although a lot of the severity comes from the fact that it is true. If they reflected on it, they would be able to see that in his reasoning and logic throughout his scriptural backed statements, that what Jesus says here is true, and that is not good for them. But he's not done here. There's more. The Gospel according to Mark. 7:10. For Moses said, honor, revere with tenderness of feeling and deference your father and your mother, And he who curses or reviles or speaks evil of or abuses or treats improperly his father or mother, let him surely die. So we have a contrasting statement. So we had the washing and the cleansing, and that was a liberalization that they added more rules and regulations on top of the law to make it more severe. And now Jesus is going to be talking about another aspect of the law where instead of making it more severe, they lightened it. So they are doing the complete opposite. And this is in reference to children and their parents. When a child attacks their parents, they are to receive the death penalty. So let's go over some verses for examples. First, we have Exodus 20 and 12, which is the honor, respect, obey, care for your father and your mother, so that your days may be prolonged in the land the Lord your God gives you. So we have the commandment to honor the mother and father. Then we have Exodus 21:17. Whoever curses his father or his mother or treats them contemptuously must be put to death. So if they are in disobedience and they curse their parents, we see that there is a death penalty. Let's look at another one. Leviticus 20 and 9. If anyone curses his father or mother, he shall most certainly be put to death. He has cursed his father or mother. His blood is on him. That is, he bears full responsibility for the consequences. And then we have Deuteronomy 5:16. Honor, respect, obey, care for your father and your mother, as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that your days on the earth may be prolonged, and so that it may go well with you in the land which the Lord your God gives you. So there's multiple examples there from multiple books in the Torah showing this idea. And the Pharisees, they're downplaying this quite significantly, as we'll see here in the next verses as we continue on in the Gospel according to Mark 7:11. But as for you, you say, a man is exempt if he tells his father or his mother what you would otherwise have gained from me. Everything I have that would have been of use to you is Corban. That is a gift already given as an offering to God. 7:12. Then you no longer are permitted him to do anything of his father or mother, but are letting him off from helping them. So what Jesus is talking about here is the way and the manner in which they would circumvent the law. So you would have the child say all these harsh things to their parents, and maybe they would preface it with, this is a gift, this is Corban, or perhaps at the end, I don't know what the linguistical structure is of Greek or Hebrew or whichever language. I guess it doesn't really matter what the language is, but in some languages you say the thing beforehand, and others you say it after, to kind of turn whatever it is that is spoken into a different category, that this is criticism, this is for their own benefit, and not the actual harshness of the words themselves that they convey. But even if you say it's a gift and you do that, the end result is the same. The parents are still being disrespected and cursed. It's just a bit of a labeling issue. Now, it should be noted that oftentimes there are things that we wish to say that we probably shouldn't, and skirting around the issue and weaseling around to say them is not necessarily a great idea. Some things are best never to be spoken or manifest in the physical realm. It's better to just not say things like this that would be classified under this category. But he continues, the Gospel according to Mark 7:13. Thus you are nullifying and making void, and of no effect, the authority of the Word of God through your tradition, which you in turn hand on, and many things of this kind you are doing. So in this instance, Jesus has given two examples, one on each side. And by them doing this, they're no longer following God. They're doing their own thing. They're not in obedience to the Lord. And they have made the law null and void, despite claiming to be the religious experts. Certainly quite the charge to be placed upon them. You can see why they wanted to kill him. The Gospel according to Mark 7:14. And he called the people to him again and said to them, Listen to me, all of you, and understand what I say. 7:15. There is not even one thing outside a man which by going into him can pollute and defile him, but the things which come out of a man are what defile him, and make him unhallowed and unclean. So Jesus is getting everybody to listen so he can reveal some deep spiritual truths. And he has already dismantled the scribes and the Pharisees when it came to their interpretation of the law, in the way that they added to it or took away from it, that effectively it rendered it null and void, that they were not in obedience to the law. They were creating their own, and their own that they could be self-righteous in, so they could lord it over everybody else. Now we're getting into the dietary law and the idea of clean and unclean, pure and defiled. So the Israelites had these dietary laws since the time of Moses. This was part of the rules and regulations that they agreed to when they decided to become God's people. He would be their God and they would be his people, and they were to follow his rules. So they had to follow these dietary laws as a result. Now when Jesus is talking about defilement, he is demonstrating that despite having these laws and these rules, even if they follow them, it's not really the cause of defilement. It is the actions of the individual, what they spew out of them, what they speak and what they say that defiles them, more so than what it is they are consuming and in what manner. Some of the purpose of these dietary rules were to keep the Israelites separated and consecrated to the Lord, so they wouldn't interact with other people and take on the things that they were doing. To a certain extent, it was quite effective. But now we have hit a point where they believe themselves to be clean and pure simply because of their diet, and they just ignore their actions. But there's more. The Gospel according to Mark 7:16. If any man has ears to hear, let him be listening, and let him perceive and comprehend by hearing. 7:17. And when he had left the crowd and had gone into the house, his disciples began asking him about the parable. So Jesus gave all this information to the Pharisees here as what we just saw, as a parable. So he didn't really explain the inner details of everything. He just kind of gave it to them and let them figure it out, left them with their heads scratching. But to his disciple, he is going to give more detail and explain things a little bit more. So that's what we're going to see now. The Gospel according to Mark 7:18. And he said to them, Then are you also unintelligent and dull, and without understanding? Do you not discern and see that whatever goes into a man from the outside cannot make him unhallowed or unclean? 7:19. Since it does not reach and enter his heart, but only his digestive tract, and passes on into the place designated to receive waste, Then he was making and declaring all food ceremonially clean, that is, abolishing the ceremonial distinction of the Levitical law. 7:20. And he said, what comes out of a man is what makes a man unclean and renders him unhallowed. 7:21. For from within, that is, out of the hearts of men, come base and wicked thoughts, sexual immorality, stealing, murder, adultery. 7:22. Coveting, a greedy desire to have more wealth, dangerous and destructive wickedness, deceit, unrestrained, indecent conduct, an evil eye, envying, slander, evil speaking, malicious misrepresentation, abusiveness, pride, the sin of an uplifted heart against God and man, foolishness, folly, lack of sense, recklessness, and thoughtlessness. 7:23. All these evil purposes and desires come from within, and they make the man unclean and render him unhallowed. So the disciples ask Jesus about this parable, and this one to me seems like an easier one to understand. But the disciples get him to explain it even more. I don't think this is quite crayon-eating terms, but it is certainly simplified compared to the version that was given to the Pharisees. And he breaks down all these different aspects of human nature and the wickedness of man, that which permeates out, and that is what causes the uncleanness. It is not what you eat. What you eat goes through your digestive tract and comes out the other end. It is the wickedness of the heart and the eye and the lust of the flesh that is the true uncleanness and wickedness. This is very alarming, especially to the Israelites. They thought by performing these actions, following these rules, that they would be pure. But it turns out that their actions are what they would be judged on as far as their hollowness. The Gospel according to Mark. 7:24. And Jesus arose and went away from there to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he went into a house and did not want anyone to know that he was there. But it was not possible for him to be hidden from public notice. 7:25. Instead, at once, a woman whose little daughter was under the control of an unclean spirit heard about him and came and flung herself down at his feet. 7:26. Now the woman was a Greek, Gentile, a Syrophoenician by nationality, and she kept begging him to drive the demon out of her little daughter. So here we have another episode of Jesus. He's gone to a location that's somewhat far away. He's gone to Tyre and Sidon. And he's attempting to do it covertly, but that's just not going to happen anymore. Everybody knows about him, and everybody's coming to see him. So he encounters this woman who has a daughter who has an unclean spirit. Now, she is a Gentile, so she's not an Israelite. She is not Jewish. Now, there's a bit of a meta commentary here that Jesus came first to the Jews and healed the Jews. Afterwards, he went to see the Gentiles. So there's kind of an idea or meta continuing that idea. So now he's on to another portion of his journey, and the way he interacts with this woman is quite iconic. And this is a very famous verse. The Gospel according to Mark. 7:27. And he said to her, First, let the children be fed, for it is not becoming or proper or right to take the children's bread and throw it to the little house dogs. 7:28. But she answered him, Yes, Lord, yet even the small pups under the table eat the little children's scraps of food. So there's this woman here whose daughter is possessed by an unclean spirit. Now this is something that there is no treatment for, that at that time there was nothing that could really be done. They were possessed and it was really hard to get the demon to leave, and there wasn't really a method for that. But she hears rumors of this healer, Jesus, who is capable of driving demons away, to purify and to heal. And he just so happens to be in the area. So she seeks him out and pleads before him to heal her daughter. And this is where the meta commentary comes in. We have Jesus talking about the children must be fed first. The food is not meant for the dogs. The children, of course, being God's people, the Israelites, the Jews, that they are to receive the salvation and the healing first. It's not right to give it to the dogs. Now, the Israelites, they would often refer to the Gentiles as dogs. It's kind of a derogatory thing. But this woman, she pleads back and talks about how the puppies under the table, they get the scraps after the kids are eating or whatever, that they give the scraps to these dogs. So the dogs get fed as well. So the meta commentary is that Jesus heals the Jews first, and afterwards the rest of the world, the Gentiles. So there's a cool little analogy in here, and we'll see what happens next. The Gospel according to Mark 7:29. And he said to her, because of this saying, you may go your way. The demon has gone out of your daughter permanently. 7:30. And she went home and found the child thrown on the couch, and the demon departed. So Jesus cast out the demon, and he did it at range. He didn't go and confront this demon. He did it while he was talking to her. He gave her exactly what she wanted and what she needed. And I'm sure there was just infinite joy when she went home and had her daughter back, free from the demon possession. How cool is that? The Gospel according to Mark 7:31. Soon after this, Jesus, coming back from the region of Tyre, passed through Sidon on the Sea of Galilee, through the region of Decapolis, the 10 cities. 7:32. And they brought to him a man who was deaf and had difficulty in speaking, and they begged Jesus to place his hand upon him. 7:33. And taking him aside from the crowd privately, he thrust his fingers into the man's ears and spat and touched his tongue. 7:34. And he looked up to heaven and sighed, as he said, Ephata, which means, be opened. 7:35. And his ears were opened, his tongue was loosed, and he began to speak distinctly as he should. So here we have Jesus healing another, and this time it is a deaf man. And his method of enacting the healing is quite interesting and distinct. That's something that I have noticed studying the Bible, is that he heals a lot of people in a lot of different ways. He's got his own style. Even if it's the same ailment, he's got something going on. It's not cookie cutter. It's not on repeat. Everyone that he heals and every relationship that he makes is unique to the individual. Now, the thing I wonder about this miracle here is that if this man was deaf from birth and never heard any language before and was restored his ability to hear, did he simultaneously learn how to speak at the same time? Because that would be a pretty intense healing. I mean, we got cochlear implants now, and they can be installed on people, and they can learn to hear after a long period of time. But to be restored completely and learn to speak properly at the same time, that's just quite fascinating. It would be interesting to know more of the details of this, and maybe we will one day, but it's just pretty cool how this all happens. The Gospel according to Mark 7:36. And Jesus, in his own interest, admonished and ordered them sternly and expressly to tell no one, But the more he commanded them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. 7:37. And they were overwhelmingly astonished, saying, He has done everything excellently, commendably, and nobly. He even makes the deaf to hear and the dumb to speak. Jesus again tells them not to tell anybody about this. Don't tell anyone what has happened. He's trying to keep a low profile here. Of course, they're not going to be able to do that. They're going to tell everybody that they encounter, especially the deaf guy who is made to speak. He probably can't stop talking and is just in rapturous joy at the ability to hear. Like, that's absolutely incredible. And it just is so overwhelming to those that witness this and have seen this healing and all the different things that he is able to do. So of course they're astonished by his miracles. It's pretty cool. And that's the end of another chapter.